Faith Intentional Community named after Jean Donovan. And I learned during the course of my time in that community that Jean Donovan was a lay missionary who, along with Sister Dorothy Hazel, Sister Ida Ford, Sister Maura Clark, was killed in El Salvador on December 2nd of 1980. And the story really struck me and became part of my theological education and my own sense of vocation. Jean Donovan was, she was a lay woman. She wasn't called to religious life, but her call to the margins of society led her to a community of Catholic sisters. Of course, she found Catholic sisters at the margins of society. They've always been there. Through education, empowering people, through education, defending healthcare as a human right, advocating for immigrants, refugees, and people living in poverty. So while I love working at a Jesuit institution because the faith that does justice permeates everything that we do, our depth of understanding of this faith that does justice would be incomplete without honoring the ways that women have shaped the Catholic social tradition. And Joan and Ralph Lane knew this. They knew that the Catholic social tradition was more than just a list of documents and principles. It's a living tradition, a tool for analysis, reflection, and social transformation. They established the Lane Center USF to advance this tradition and broaden its impact. And Sister Simone, you are living this tradition and making it relevant to Catholics and non-Catholics and people who identify with faith in a variety of ways or not. And we're so grateful and honored to have you here. And we're incredibly fortunate to have the president of USF, Paul Fitzgerald, here to formally welcome Sister Simone and introduce her. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brigham, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Sister Simone Campbell has served as Executive Director of Network since 2004. She is a religious leader, an attorney, poet, with extensive experience in public policy and advocacy for systemic change. In Washington, D.C., she lobbies on issues that help mend the gaps in income and wealth in the United States, focused specifically on how they disproportionately affect persons of color and women. Around the country, she is a noted speaker and educator on these public policy issues. During the 2010 congressional debate about healthcare reform, she wrote the famous Nuns Letter supporting the reform bill and got 59 leaders of Catholic sisters communities, including the Leadership Council of Women Religious, to sign on. The action was cited by many as critically important in passing the Affordable Care Act. She was thanked in person by President Obama, who invited her to the signing ceremony as the bill became a law. In 2012, she was also instrumental in organizing Nuns on the Bus, a great tour through 9 states to oppose the Ryan budget, incorrectly labeled by Paul. I really got social teaching, and he was like wrong. It was an F paper. It had been approved by the House, unfortunately not by the Senate. This budget would decimate programs meant to help people in need. Nuns on the Bus received an avalanche of attention across the nation from religious communities, elected officials, and of course the media. She led 5 cross-country Nuns on the Bus trips focused on economic justice, comprehensive immigration reform, voter turnout, bridging the divides in politics and society, and most recently, mending the gaps in wealth and access in our nation. Sister Simone has often been featured in the national and international media, including appearances on 60 Minutes, and more importantly, the Colbert Report, and The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. She has received numerous awards, including the Franklin D. Roosevelt for Freedoms Award and the Defender of Democracy Award from the International Parliamentarians for Global Action. In addition, she has been the keynote or feature speaker at numerous large gatherings, including the 2012 Democratic National Convention.
Yes.
Prior to coming to Network Policy Organization that works like Network to protect the interests of people living in poverty. Sister Simone also participated in a delegation of religious leaders to Iraq in December 2002, just prior to the war, and was later, while at Network, part of the Catholic Relief Services delegation to Lebanon and Syria to study the Iraqi refugee situation there. Before Jericho, Sister Simone served as the general director of her religious community, the Sisters of Social Service. She was the leader of her sisters in the United States, Mexico, Taiwan, and the Philippines. In this capacity, she negotiated with government and religious leaders in each of these countries. In 1978, Sister Simone founded and served for 18 years as the lead attorney for the Community Law Center in Oakland, California. She served the family law and probate needs of the working poor of her county. She is also the author of A Nun on the Bus, How All of Us Can Create Hope, Change, and Community, published in April 2014 by HarperCollins. And just a personal note, so 36 years ago I was a novice, a Jesuit novice, living in South Central Los Angeles, and I and my fellow novices were very inspired by the Sisters of Social Service, one of the best religious communities, all in presentation and other. But just a courageous group of women who were literally putting their bodies on the street to block the vans from the Immigration and Naturalization Services from taking people out to LAX airport, putting them on planes to certain death in San Salvador when the planes landed. So, Sisters of Social Service rock.
Multiple options. Thank you. Will this work? It seems like it. No, you know what, I think I'm gonna do this. Because then I can just keep it close and then everybody can hear better. Yes. It's not that we have hearing issues, it's just how loud is it? Thank you for that very kind and lengthy introduction. I realize I'm getting old. Your bio goes on as long as the talk, it's problematic. Thank you for that. It's such a treat to be here at USF and to be in San Francisco, to be back in California, where my heart just feels so relaxed to be here and away from the East Coast, which some of you East Coasters can appreciate is a little more formal and a lot colder right now than it is here. So thank you for the welcome, and it's really great to be here. I want to spend some time tonight talking about how women shape Catholic social teaching, but obviously I'm speaking from the perspective as a woman religious. And as I've been involved in a lot of interfaith work of late, well, actually late, probably most of my religious life, but we're over there. But I've been aware of the fact that most religious traditions have only a clerical state or a lay state and don't have the wonderful freedom and adventure of being in a community committed to working at the margins and to making trouble. And what made this really clear to me was that an attorney friend of mine who's Episcopalian wanted to have a communal experience of nourishing a commitment to justice. But the only way she could find to do it was to go on the CDSP, the Episcopal school over in Berkeley, on their ordination track. Because they didn't really have this troublemaking category. Now, many of us in religious life have been seriously annoyed that we have not been able to be ordained. But I personally have found it the most immense freedom, because what it allows is for us to be ministers of sacrament in a way of presence that is not possible when you get caught in a bunch of the clerical constraints. So for me, this has been a measure of freedom and joy, and quite annoying to some people. Now, most of you know that there was this period of unpleasantness, right, in the Vatican. The troubles, I refer to them as the troubles. And it is still true that there are dioceses in the United States where I can't speak on church property. But, which I find totally amusing. But what happened after this election on November 6th, I believe it was on the 7th or the 8th, I get an email from the Vatican press office asking if they could interview me about the results of the election. I was like, what? And so I gave it to our press person, he sent it out. So I'm talking to Sister Mary Bernadette, a daughter of St. Paul, and she said, well, you know, ordinarily we would interview a bishop, but that, in your country right now, that's not recommended. But what it made me realize, she said that we were brainstorming who we could talk to, and your name came up. And what it brought home to me was that when we stay faithful to mission, it gets noticed. Staying faithful to mission is to keep our roots strong and deep and connected. And that is what's important, not all the other peripheral stuff that goes around. So that for me, Catholic social tradition, being rooted in Catholic social tradition, really is part of living a contemplative life. And that the contemplative reveals the tradition, and the tradition reveals the contemplative path. And I don't think, at least for me, it's not possible to do one without the other. And in that sense of the contemplative as being engaged in the deep listening to that vibrant word of God that lives among us and calls us forward at every moment. It is being sensitive to the needs that are revealed, to the anguish that we need, to the needs of anyone, whether they're in Congress or on the street or on the airplane. On the airplane, the mom behind me with her 3-year-old who did not want to have her seatbelt fastened. I was just so keenly aware of the challenge of parenting and wishing their daughter could kick the back of the seat, but wishing that there could be some healing and presence for her too. And so I think that if we are engaged in the contemplative journey, we naturally come to Catholic social teaching. And if we're involved in Catholic social teaching, we come to the contemplative path. And for me, I started on the more activist side and found myself drawn to the contemplative way. But either way, we end up in that same moment, being at the margins. Now I want to share with you a couple of stories from the bus. We just finished this bus trip. Some of you know that. Your reaction to nuns on the bus that's really heartening. I really thought if I never did another good thing in my life and I wrote the nun's letter, I thought, nunc dimittis, now you dismiss your servant in peace. My eyes had seen. But then the bus really happened because the Vatican censure of the leadership conference named network as being a bad influence on Catholic sisters. I mean, that was the problem. They were really upset that we'd won on healthcare and bishops had lost, but that's really what's the dynamic why we got named. But because of that, we had the bus. Because my question was, how do we use this moment for mission? We never said a bad word about the bishops. We never pushed back about anything. We stayed faithful to our mission. And the best part for me was the bishops had written a letter saying that the Paul Ryan budget failed the basic moral test. But the bishops never advertised it. So as we did our first bus trip, we handed out that letter every place we went, saying, we stand with our bishops. And they say, should we send them a thank you note? I don't know. But on the bus, we did this bus trip about tax policy and how the horrible tax bill passed by the Republicans. And right now, I have to tell you, they're trying to push through another huge giveaway. It may come to the floor tomorrow. It is horrifying and shocking. It has not been seen in committee. I understand it's 220 pages long. It was revealed yesterday, maybe voted on the floor of the House tomorrow. So it's crazy. It is crazy. But, apart from that, welcome to the contemplative life. Call your members of the state local, but you all are pretty good. So call Nancy Pelosi and say, keep working at this. The challenge on the bus is always staying open and able to welcome people in and to listen deeply to what we hear. And so on the bus every morning, what we do is we spend a half hour together in prayer with the sisters, just 15 minutes of silence and just deep listening, 15 minutes of sharing what we hear. And then keeping our hearts open all day to receive the people we meet, who we connect with. And let me just tell you a few of the stories that, for me, draw me deeper into the truth of our time, into letting my heart be broken open, because I think that is the essence of Catholic social teaching, is to let our hearts be broken open to the needs around us. So we were in Columbia, South Carolina, with Congressman Jim Clyburn, and we did a business round, or no, not a business, a round table with a bunch of social service agencies, and one group who works with immigrants was talking about how they had been living in this trailer park, because a trailer park is affordable housing, that this was great. The trailer park got bought by not a developer, but somebody that wanted to improve the situation of people living in the trailers. And so they created a business model where everybody living in their trailer could pay rent and then own the trailer. This was their great theory. This was a good idea. However, in South Carolina, a trailer is considered to be a vehicle. And it is not legal for undocumented people to own a vehicle. So this whole community of undocumented living in these trailers couldn't pay towards ownership because there's a registration process with the state. And they all had to move. They all had to move and had no place to go. And they ended up creating a tent city that we visited, trying to create an alternative. Now, you have to know Columbia, South Carolina is one of the places that got a tremendous amount of rain in one of the hurricanes that went through. Their central place where they had most of their tents was flooded. And what I realized in that experience is how people with good intentions, if we don't ask the deeper questions, how we can stumble in and not know the consequences of our actions and feel quite proud of ourselves. Look what I've done. I'm allowing these people to be able to buy their homes, only to have totally displaced the population. Catholic social teaching challenges us arts or the social tradition challenges us to see the complexity, to embrace the reality that it is way more complicated than my judgment. The contemplative life challenges us, challenges me, not to hold on to my judgments about others, about situations. And my current difficulty is about our president. That's really not my judgment about him, but that's my spiritual journey. I'm sure nobody else shares that one. But what I've learned is that the tradition challenges us to go deeper, always to go deeper, to learn more. Now let me tell you about we were in Southern Illinois on the bus and heard about a spike in attacks on young immigrant-appearing men. And what it turned out was that because in Southern Illinois, the immigrant community could not have a bank account, the banks wouldn't deal with them, that they were carrying cash. And because they were carrying cash, they became targets for robbery. And a number had been beaten rather badly. But they couldn't figure out an alternative. They were carrying cash in their shoes. They were trying to do everything they could. But just by looking like an immigrant young man, you were vulnerable to attack. It made me realize the privilege of walking in white skin in a way that I had never actually thought about in that same way. And for me, Catholic social tradition challenges us to break out of what I take as normal, to take in another view. The contemplative life challenges us to walk towards our limitations, towards our blind side, to let something new be revealed. And it's that combination of Catholic social tradition and the challenge of the contemplative life that I believe really is sort of like a nutcracker for hard hearts that ends up breaking us open in a way that becomes quite gospel-like on the good days and quite annoying on others. And then we were in a women's day center, and this was in Raleigh, North Carolina. And this is a day center where homeless women can come during the day and have respite. It's the only one in the whole Tri-City area. If you know Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, my geography. There's one thing about being on a bus, you get a good sense of at least names. But in this area, we met Dorothy, who is a homeless woman who had been promised an apartment, a studio apartment, about 10 days after we saw her. She was so excited, but until then, she was staying, spent the day at the respite center, and then at night, a whole bunch of the women slept in the parking lot right outside the respite center. And they did that because they could be together. They trusted community. They had the comfort of each other. But Dorothy told us she was 54. She had never been homeless before. When she was 52, her husband died very unexpectedly. Just had a heart attack and died. And even though she was working, she was so depressed, so devastated, that it sounded like maybe she had a bit of a mental break, but she just lost everything. And it wasn't until she finally found this respite center that she felt like she could get herself back. And she said, "It's my women friends that gave me myself back." And I realized that is the story for me of what it means to be a sister of social service. And those of us that are religious women, I would say, or associates, you probably have that same feeling that we've discovered our true selves in a communal setting. That we cannot do this alone. And it led me to the realization that the ultimate lie of white privilege is believing that we're supposed to do it alone. That I'm supposed to take care of my own family on my own, no help please, because I'm tough. That to me is the ultimate lie of white privilege, and only our wealth could ever make us begin to think that that's true. The truth is that we do it in community, that we do it together. We are connected, and in that connection we get ourselves given back to us. That's when I discover who I am, is in relationship. Carrying these people in my heart is such a gift and treasure and pain. Because what happens is, I don't know what happened to Dorothy. Did she get her apartment? I don't know what happened to the folks in the tent city in Columbia. I don't know what happens to any of the people. But I carry them and treasure them. And that, I believe, is what Catholic social teaching is about, is that we treasure everyone that we meet. Everyone has a story to tell. And so, it kind of brings me to my fourth story, which is a story of a member of Congress who come, the new Congress will no longer be with us. And I, thanks be to God. But we went to on the bus, we lobbied 13 Republican offices, 13 Republicans who had voted for the tax bill and against health care. And my question to them was, why did you vote to hurt your people? We only met with one representative, but to their staff, we'd say, why did your boss vote to hurt your people? But this one was the court. This one, Roskin, in West Chicago, outside of Chicago, his office was in a private jet airport controlled by TSA, so that you could only get into the office if you had been pre-screened by TSA. And anyone wanting to do any sort of a demonstration or anything had to do it 2 blocks away for the safety of the private jets, apparently, or the member of Congress. But the thing that I realized was he was afraid of his constituents. He was afraid to be touched, to be uncomfortable, to have hard questions asked. So we met with his chief of staff, lovely woman, blonde hair, sitting there taking notes, and we'd say to her, well, could you answer the question, why? Or we'd ask something else, well, why? I'm here, she was so angry. I'm here just to take notes. I was like, oh, really? That seems like that's kind of a hard position for you. I kept trying to kind of, that's what my job is. Oh, well, is this a bad day? I'm really sorry. I'm concerned about it. No. I'm usually pretty good at leading my way in, but there was no connection at all. And what it taught me was, when you're afraid of people in your constituencies, you need to be protected and frightened. And you need a TSA guards, I guess. But it isn't life. It isn't the fullness of life that we're called to. Now, ironically, they had also brought in the religion, what was she? She was the religion outreach worker. Well, the religion outreach worker, she was evangelical. She was trying to relate to us. us as evangelicals. Oh dear. The pain of it was nothing about curiosity about who you are. Curiosity about what's going on. Curiosity about you're driving around the country for 27 days or, oh, no curiosity at all. It was all about a protective stance. Which led me to realize as I prepared for this talk that I think the anchor piece where Catholic social tradition and the contemplative life intersect is in loving curiosity. If we embody loving curiosity, that is where community flourishes. And Pope Francis says in, I love quoting Pope positively, it's really fun. He says in Laudato Si, he says that we're called to a civic and political love. It's paragraph 231, which itself is felt in every action that seeks to build a better world. Love for society and commitment to the common good are outstanding expressions of charity, which affects not only relationships between individuals, but also macro relationships, social, economic, and political ones. That is why the Church set before the world the ideal of a civilization of love. And isn't a civilization of love really that loving curiosity about another, about our world, about the dimension of who we are? And so I believe that we are called to walk towards the other, to walk into the unknown, to walk willing into a future that encounters, that meets, that is changed, that is stirred up. And it might be on a bus or it might be just walking on the streets here in San Francisco, but we're all called to meet another. And in that meeting, know that the Spirit's alive, that God is revealed, that we are not orphaned, that we are connected. And if we do that, then I believe that we can exhibit Pope Francis's, he's got these 5 characteristics of holiness in his exhortation on holiness. I never think about being holy. Anybody think about being holy? That's the furthest thing from my mind. But I just think about being annoying, actually. But what I discovered in Pope Francis' exhortation, he says the 5 characteristics of 21st century holiness are, first of all, that you have to be persevering, that we have to hang in there, that we have to keep going, that we have to have a curiosity that endures beyond the hard times. He says the second thing is that you have to have joy and a sense of humor. Now, isn't that fun to have as an effort of holiness? I think that's really important. And then he says you need passion and boldness. Isn't that the antithesis of our rather staid, controlled U.S. white culture? It's the thing that I think we're really challenged to break out of. And this is why I think that women religious really have an angle on this, because we're pretty bold, we're pretty passionate. You know, we lose, which is really cool, which makes it a lot easier to be passionate and bold. But it is the adventure, to know adventure. The 4th point he says is that you have to do it in community, that we don't do this alone. And the 5th is that we have to live in constant prayer. Now that's what I used to think holiness was being in the chapel, kind of private and alone and praying all the time. Well, it's not me. What I've realized is rather in the contemplative journey in this world, what it's about, I believe, is breathing. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and welcoming, and breathing out the worry and concern. Or sometimes it's breathing in the worry and concern and breathing out the transforming joy. constant prayer is just about knowing I'm connected to you. And here's the ultimate joy. For women religious, it's knowing that we're connected to each other. It's family. In my family, we have fights on the internet, but we still know we're connected. That is what sustains us. That we're connected. That it is the breath of the Spirit that keeps us going. And in that action is when we know that our advocacy, that our engagement, that our listening to people's stories, that our effort to change our very frustrating world is all about the gospel. Where Jesus said, go. Do it. Don't go alone. Go in twos. I have a hunch they probably went off in clumps of people. But do it together. And it's doing it together that makes it real. So to close this part, we'll move on to the next part. What I wanted to close with was one of my poems about, and it's about the contemplative life. So she wanted it carefully. And it's called Living Waters. And it goes like this. Okay, living waters. Think all the different waters, biblical waters, rainwater today, having rain, wasn't that great? It goes like this. Impetuous me favors the passionate tumult of spring river flooding. Sensuous me favors the indolent caress of summer river flowing. Reflective me favors the penetrating seep of autumn river trickling. Even aloof shy me favors the chilled reserve of winter river freezing. But all of me resists evaporation. I resist the sucking, pulling, warm air wresting me from known boundaries. I resist drifting unseen to unknown parts. I resist the uncertainty of unformed floating, yearning rather to surround rocks and carve new paths. I resist the ambiguous, foggy drift. But luckily, at times, I am yanked into air, there, beholding earth's anguish, weeping, raining, puddling, perhaps the beginning of an exuberant spring. Thank you very much.
When I teach Catholic social thought, I often use that simplistic see, judge, act language, and I'm just thinking about it now with your invitation to think about the contemplative life and how that leads to really this reverence and prayer and discernment in common. I just find myself savoring that and thinking about how that deepens, I think, my understanding of what Catholic social thought is really about. It's a much deeper process. And the way in which you then are able to carry those stories with such reverence. It's a real challenge, I think, to all of us who talk about being contemplatives in action, in a Jesuit context. So thank you. So now I want to invite 4 colleagues to begin the conversation in response to your talk. First, I'm going to welcome Maggie Baker, who is the Dean of the School of Nursing and Health Professions, and she'll pose a question. You don't want to go first, Maggie?
No.
I'm going in alphabetical order. It's entirely different, yeah. Followed by Liz Lopez, who's a graduate student in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program in the School of Education, and Sonia Poole, who is Associate Professor of Marketing and the President of the USF Faculty Association, and Sydney West, who is Academic Scheduling Coordinator in the School of Nursing and Health Professions and Chair of the President's Advisory Council on the Status of Women. So in that order, I'm going to invite my colleagues to come up, pose a question, and just begin the conversation. So Meg, you're first.
I'm
You're gonna
ready
pass?
so fast.
Okay, so Liz, would you please pose the question? Yeah, you don't mind just, so that the
We'll look like we're talking to you. It's California, we don't have to be.
So given your experience as an advocate in many important issues, what are 3 key takeaways to strategizing and organizing towards a more just society for people most impacted by institutionalized inequities?
I didn't hear. You didn't hear.
Would you repeat the question?
You couldn't hear.
It's the microphone. And read it very slowly.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Maybe she can say it's close. Two more times.
So given your experience as an advocate in many important issues, what are 3 key takeaways in strategizing and organizing towards a more just society for people most impacted by institutionalized inequities?
Trust the people impacted. Listen, but also follow. And get some political savvy. No, wait a minute. I take that back. Here's the challenge. People impacted often have extreme pain, and in that extreme pain, react in ways that get the dominant culture to dismiss. And so they have to kind of decide, are you trying to get the dominant culture's ear, or do you need to express your community's pain? And those are 2 different realities. Let me give an example right now. There's an effort on the part of many in the immigrant community to do a massive campaign during this lame duck season to get Congress to not do any funding for the Department of Homeland Security. That is impacting communities' anger, pain, and it's totally unrealistic. The lobbyist, we won't do that network because we're lobbying. We're not letting that emotion come out. Rather, what we're saying is don't give them any additional money. Go with the Senate bill. Get as little as possible. Give them as little as possible. But the impacted community needs to express their pain, needs to push the boundaries so that the next time we do this, they've prepared ground. So while but the challenge is to not get too disappointed when they're not successful this time. That's the trick. So to stay, I think the third point, so get some political savvy, but the third point is stay in relationship, stay engaged, don't walk away. That perseverance as the first element of holiness, I think is the big challenge. But we in non-impacted communities need to follow, need to support, and need to stay in the relationship. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
And it's a hard one. It's a hard one. Somebody else have a question? Have a comment?
Yes.
Sonia. Sonia and I were having a conversation earlier, so I'm really excited about this.
You seem to understand the importance of influence, connections, and leverage in politics, but you also mentioned how it conflicts with a spirituality or a contemplative practice, and I'm wondering if you could speak more to that. You say it's toxic to spiritual life. Can be, yeah. And I ask you this because when you speak of influence and connections and leverage, I'm a marketing professor, and that's what that is. And I would like to know how to teach my students how to balance that and still have a spiritual life?
Well, there still is spiritual life, that's for sure. The piece is, for me, the challenge of the contemplative life is to have a heart for everyone. So that when I'm living Paul Ryan, you don't talk to me anymore, but Paul Ryan, that I have a heart for him, as well as a policy agenda. So it's working on a level of caring. Let me tell you, oh my God. Yesterday we were I was at a reception for grassroots mobilizer folks who the House Dems held this reception. So I'm busy doing my schmoozing, my influencing, talking about Congressman Bobby Scott about his plan for increasing wages, and I'm talking to, Dave Cicilline about his protecting pre-existing conditions, and I'm doing, working the work. When Leader Pelosi, staff comes up, the leader wants you to get it. So this is the second time it's happened. She grabs me out of the conversation with a member of Congress because she wants me to pray. She wants me to lead grace at this reception. And what I've realized is part of being a Catholic sister that I've got this title, official prayer, but it also just delights Nancy Pelosi's heart that I'm a girl and not a boy. So but it's knowing her personally that has created that connection for her. It's being with, it's caring as much about the idiot that had his office in the jetport as about the folks in the trailer park. And I'd much rather care about the folks in the trailer park. Because I want to slap that guy upside the head. But the contemplative path is to radically accept and love all. But here's the good news, is it's also about fighting. Now I get into fighting a lot, but what I've come to realize is it's about fighting for the vision. So my hunch is with marketing that it would be fighting for the vision and caring for everyone. Does that make any sense? Wandered the universe to get that. That was pretty good.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. This is incredible. I feel like my heart is going to jump out of my chest right now. This is very cool. I've actually lobbied in Jim Clyburn's office too, so hopefully he's not getting tired of annoying women in his space.
And he has some good annoying women on his staff.
He does. He totally does. My question is, the Catholic Church is obviously an institution led by men, and that's for.
How do you notice?
I know.
Some would say it's not being led.
Well, I'm glad you said that, not me.
That's why you bring in somebody from outside.
Right. My question is, what areas do you see to be areas of critical leadership for women? Whether they be in terms of Catholic social teaching or just in terms of the political climate that we find ourselves in. What are the critical areas where women, whether they be religious, whether they be lay, can really show or have the biggest impact in terms of leadership?
All right. Okay, here's the deal. For me, it's don't fight against. Because if you fight against, you push back against, you reinforce the very thing that you're pushing back against. So the temptation is, especially for me, a lot of this, is I want to lobby the bishops, shake them up and blah, blah, let me in, blah, blah. Don't do that, because that just reinforces their resistance. Rather, I encourage stepping into the place you're called, stepping into the ministry that you're called to respond. Now here I have, can I share my heresy? It's this, yeah, fighting for vision, not this. But my heresy, this is heresy according to Simone. Might be true, I don't know. But, we find there's a lot of anguish around women's ordination, to be a part of boys. Well, quite frankly, I became a lawyer at a time when there were very few women practicing law. And the first women practicing law were as bad as the guys. It took a quantum leap of us to change the culture over in Alameda County, and it took time. So just getting women ordained, if we don't change the culture, we're still going to have clericalism. That's the problem. And in Francis's Call to Holiness, it was so annoying. No, it was his letter to the International Church about the sex abuse, saying that it was a question of clericalism. Duh. And then he said that we all should do prayer and fasting and change it. Like it was all of our fault. Oh, it just made me so mad. But then I realized he was right. That made me really mad. Because clerics won't, I'm sorry guys, but just don't recognize it. It's like privilege. It is a privilege that, our white privilege, we don't see it ourselves. We got to run into it. We got to work on it, but it's hard work. How do I get off on that? Okay, so rather than fighting against the clericalism, let's live into this form of sacred ministry. So here's my theory. This is my theory. This is my heresy. Okay. Ordination is an extension of baptism, right?
Yes.
We're baptized in the priest, prophet, king. Ordination is an extension. There are different kinds of ordination. Different kinds of baptism, right? There's baptism in desire, baptism, ordinary baptism with water, baptism of blood, baptism of who knows what. If ordination is an extension of baptism, and there's different kinds of baptism, why aren't there different kinds of ordination? And in my experience, I was ordained by my sisters when I was the leader of our community because I heard confession, I anointed the sick, I gave the Eucharist, we shared bread and leadership. So I believe, rather than fight for the guys to say we've got the seal of approval, other than that, take the authority of our call. If you're called to be in ministry, step into it. Live it fully. And the very act of loving ministry will be your ordination. So we are called to be leaders, and I'll tell you what, people are hungry for loving leadership. It's not the most fun. That's why I think the bus is such an attraction, is because all are welcome. All are welcome. And then you get assigned to the bus. So by the time we got to Mar-a-Lago, can you believe we went to Mar-a-Lago?
Yeah.
By the time we got to Mar-a-Lago, we had thousands of people had signed with us. And that was church. That was church. And so, and people tell me, I signed the bus back in 2014. I remember I signed back in the end of the bus. People remember that. It was sacrament. So let us live boldly into a loving ministry. How's that? Thank you.
Simone, will you take a couple other questions from the audience? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Sonia and Sydney and Liz. So we'll take a couple of questions. I'll bring the mic.
If people are bold. This is always the hard part, where I have to tell the story about the time I went to the Cloistered Carmelites and gave a talk. And then we were supposed to have a response period. There was a very long contemplative silence. And I'm an extrovert, so just don't be Cloistered Carmelites.
That was terrific, thank you. So could you give us some advice when you're ordained or formally ordained in the church where you are that kind of priest?
Advice?
Yeah. What would you say to us?
Go for it.
For what?
Whatever you're called to. See, this is the deal. This is the deal. This is where the contemplative becomes critically important. It's that deep listening, where are you called? Where are you called? And it's a wee small voice inside. And that's why I say I lobby from a contemplative stance, because when I lobby, I try to listen to that inner place in the person that I'm engaging, as well as the inner place in me. And I've been drawn to this really odd, amazing, wonderful, ultimate gift in my life to do this lobbying work. But it's all just trying to listen to that inner movement and be willing. Don't be afraid. Walk towards it. Walk towards trouble. It's the best way to do it. I did this whole talk for the Unitarians about the whole theme of it. This was a big, huge talk, 6,000 Unitarians in the company. And I did this talk about walking towards trouble. I still meet Unitarians and think, oh, walk towards trouble. That's what we're doing. It's like, oh, go for it. It's really fun.
Good evening. I'm with Faithful Fools. We're a live work community in the Tenderloin. And forgive me, I've had a rough day, so I'm thinking about my heroes today to kind of keep me going. And one of them is Mother Jones, the union activist who came to her life's work after horrible tragedies and really found her life. I find myself moved by her saying, pray for the dead, but fight like hell for the living. You know, that's, for me, is a little bit about what you're talking about. But I'm wondering, in your darker days and darker times, do you have people that you draw upon who kind of give you a little bit of wisdom and bring you back to where your center is?
Question. For me, I think it's poetry mostly. So like Rilke or Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver's poem "Lead" is for me if I know it by heart, I'd say it, but I don't. But it just stirs my soul. But you know what really does it? You know what really does it for me? It's all the people I carry in my heart. I mean, how can I have the luxury of going, you know, like on Mystery Theater on PBS? How can I possibly do that in the face of the folks that I know? And I carry, some of you heard me tell the story, but I carry Margaret's picture. And Margaret died in 2000. Margaret died in 2012 because the Affordable Care Act had not been implemented. When Margaret died, her sister and her sister's partner, now wife, brought me this picture at our Cincinnati Nuns on the Bus gathering. And Margaret has fueled my passion for Medicaid expansion. No more Margaret should die. It's a pro-life issue. It's the right thing to do. It's immoral that the richest nation on earth, we can't find a way to get our people health care. It's wrong. But how can I have a bad day? That's what they do. But Margaret stirs me up. But here's the other part of the story with Margaret, is that I got her picture in 2012. I talked about her at the Democratic Convention. I did everything. I mean, in 2014, I'm in Lexington, Kentucky on the bus, and a woman comes up, puts her hand on my shoulder, and says, "Oh, Sister Simone, I'm Nancy Whiting. I'm one of Margaret Kistler's sisters, and I just want to thank you for helping to heal our family." And she turned around and walked away. I ran after her, I grabbed her, and it turned out, I didn't realize this, but there were 5 siblings. And you know how people get guilty? And they were blaming each other? You should have looked in on her. When you had money, you should have gotten her insurance. When you're a nurse, you would have known something. Or, you know, that kind of. My talking about Margaret helped them make sense of an otherwise senseless death. And so what I realized was so rarely do we have the grace gift of knowing a ripple of something that we did. And so for me, the healing in their family nourished me. My speaking about Margaret nourished them. And you know what? We now think of each other as family. So at this jet port in West Chicago, Jeannie, who brought me her picture, and her wife, Lynn, drove down from Madison, Wisconsin to be at our rally because they didn't want me to be in the neighborhood and not be supported. But we're family to each other. That keeps me going. How could it not? I can go on
The question I have, I don't know.
That's magic.
One question I have is, this city is so fast-paced, and I'm used to building community in maybe slower-paced locations, but there's this narrative of the scarcity of time, and I'm really struck by how you're talking about meeting each other, and that's where the magic happens. It reminds me of Martin Buber, all real living is meeting. How do you recommend in a city like this we meet each other? Like, what would be some concrete steps towards encountering, walking towards the trouble or the other and finding ourselves in that?
That is a challenge because it's that dominant white story that we have to hurry because we're important. Time is money, you know. Gotta rush, gotta go, and it's all this narrative to be important, which is really hard. So what I've recommended is that I think one of the things that's hard is that I want to make community in defined locations. At my parish, at work, on the Hill, with the interfaith groups that we collaborate with our secular colleagues. Well, I just had to give it up and rather create community where I am. So I advise things like grocery store missionary work. Talk to people in line. I hardly stand in line. It's only in the grocery store. But say to the person in front of you, behind you, hey, how you doing? I've been really worried about whatever. Have you thought of it? I'm curious. And I find out that people, of course I talk politics, but I find out that people are really concerned about wages. People are concerned about housing. People are concerned about whatever. Healthcare. Oh, healthcare. Man, I heard some stories about healthcare. Woo. But it's exercising curiosity wherever you can. And inviting in the others. Some days it's not worth it. The benefit of being in the grocery store is that you know it's not as long as a Thanksgiving dinner. And if the conversation goes bad, it'll be over soon. Well, what could be bad? What could be bad? But how do we just talk to people? Be curious. Wherever. Get some great stories. But then, once you've done grocery store missionary work, exercise holy curiosity, then you have to do the second part. The second part is sacred gossip. Not ordinary gossip, sacred gossip, where you share the stories of what you've heard. Like I share the story about Margaret or the folks in Columbia or Raleigh, or West Chicago. Sharing those stories then leads us in together. Gives people other ideas too. Does this make sense? Oh, it's always worrisome, you come around to the talk.
Hi, I'm Barbara. I have a question that is partly personal, so I just bridge it to the question. So I used to be music minister leader back home in Slovakia and Denmark.
Slovakia? Where in Slovakia?
I'm in Prešov.
Oh, we have sisters in Bratislava and Košice
Oh, Košice.
and Martin.
Oh,
Yeah. Anyway, we'll bond over Slovakia.
But yeah, and especially I think in Denmark, which is interesting because I moved to Denmark. And what I encountered that being a female music leader, many times it happened that I was said to live in a certain way, to sing in a certain way, and play in a certain way that is more appropriate to women. Where you never hear this toward men leadership when they sing or play music, because I should be more like feminine, more like, like singing high and nice. Rose is not my style. You can hear my voice is pretty deep. So, so my question is like, what leadership qualities I should acquire to know how to respond appropriately as a woman and still be strong, and especially in the area of Catholic Church and leadership that ministry.
You need to connect with my sisters in Slovakia. I'll tell you, most of my sisters, the way they deal with it is to not be in church settings. I mean, that's where it's coming. So what they're making community in non-church settings, what they're finding with a lot of the young people, it's more attractive to be in community than to be in the institution. Now, I think all of us, all women, and maybe guys too, I don't know, I've never talked to a guy about this, but that we need to go through our radical feminist phase. I was a radical feminist. I could barely live with myself. I don't know how my sisters lived with me at all. But when I went through my radical feminist phase, I basically was angry at most of the expressions that you described, which I encountered on a fairly regular basis. I was in law school, I was in Sacramento, I went to UC Davis Law School. I didn't encounter it in law school, but in church settings, going to church, But once I got over my radical phase, and what I discovered was that I had been radical because I was so angry at myself for having given in to a bunch of my own control and oppression. And that just made me so mad at myself that the anger came out to others. But once I made peace with the fact that, yes, Simone, you had given in, you had, you don't need to know all this confession's good for the soul, but that'd be a whole other talk. But what I finally came to was the sense of my own worth, my own authorship, and be able to say, this is who I am. If you want me here, this is what it is. But to be secure in that and not to be controlled by other people's explanation. But I had to go through the anger part to shed my giving in or selling myself short so that I could then claim who I am with the dignity that we're called. Get it? Yeah, I was not fit for human consumption when I was in my radical feminist phase. But luckily my sisters loved me through it, and that's why community is important.
One more question, James?
And then I have a poem to end with, if that's okay.
Thank you, thanks, Simone. So on your literature for Network, and I've heard you speak at other events, you have a radical commitment to the LGBTQ community. Thank you, that's so much needed in the Catholic Church, and it really is important. At the moment, the trans community is under attack through healthcare, through politics, through religion, in the military, from government level, and they are, particularly trans women of color, are most vulnerable and highest statistics in the country of people dying as a result of murder and violent death and aggression. So I'm sorry to end on such a womp. But how do we elevate that conversation in the church? How do we elevate that conversation in our university and in our schools when there's such an ignorance around the transgender identity and people who are trans? Have you got experience with that? I think it just is such a challenge. And I just sort of want to add that
it's such an anguish Get Jim Martin down here talking about it. I mean, I don't know if he's been out here, but Jim's doing a really good job of it. Lift up the stories. You know, what it makes me think of is Cooper, this musician, reached out to us and asked if she could play at the lobby visit we were doing with the Tenney's office, who just conceded the election. She had this great song. It was wonderful. We asked her to leave the verse out because you don't even know all that. But afterwards I said, oh, what a treasure, what a treasure. And she just started to cry. And says, I'm trans, and the president wants to erase me. What am I going to do? The president wants to erase me. All I can do is hold her. And I think one thing that is difficult is to make people too much into campaigns, because then the very campaigness takes away some of the human story. And how do we share more of the human story? How do we let it be known? I can't imagine anything more painful than to feel you've been born in the wrong body, and what trauma that is. And Cooper has stayed with me as emblematic of the crisis, but also emblematic of the ignorance of people around her, of not being free to acknowledge who she is. I don't know. And so I just do this by telling stories. Just tell stories. Let your heart be broken open. And then the nice thing about having your heart broken open is there's room for everybody. If your heart's closed, you only got room for a few people. But if it's broken open, there's room for everybody, I discovered, and including Paul Ryan. But the other thing that happens is it sort of pours out. The love pours out too. So let it be poured out. Can I end with
Thank you. Yes, please.
Okay. Because I feel like these things are super challenging, and I feel overwhelmed at times. And I know some of you have heard me do this. This is a problem we talk a lot around the country. People hear it, and I saw it on the internet. Oh, scary thought. Did I say something new? I don't know. Anyway, but I wanted to end with this because it's a feeling that I have sometimes of being overwhelmed, of feeling not enough. Do you feel that way? Kind of like, well, hourly. Yeah, hourly, whatever. And this is a poem called Loaves and Fish, and we all remember the story of Jesus being followed by all the people, and they're out in the wilderness, and the apostles say to Jesus, send them back to town. They're going to get hungry and grumpy. Please send them back to town. And Jesus says to the apostles, feed them yourselves. And Peter, my patron, the doofus that he is, well, you also got are a couple of day-old loaves of bread and a couple of stinky fish. I mean, what's that? What's so many? I don't know. And Jesus must have been, do I have to do everything? So he has everybody sit down in groups of 50, every the community organizer, practicing holy curiosity. And then he blesses the bread, hands it out. And then in Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 14, it says, 5,000 men were fed, to say nothing of the women and children. Well, now that pissed me off. I feel like we've been together long enough, I can use that word. But so I prayed about it. This is my odd prayer life. So I prayed about it. And what I came to realize was they only counted the ones who thought it was a miracle. The women knew they brought snacks from home. They were all sharing because it's going to leave home with a family for the day and not bring some snacks along.
my prayer for us in this challenging time. I always joked that the miracle of loaves and fish was sharing. The women always do this. But in this moment of need and notoriety, I ache, tremble, almost weep at folks so hungry, malnourished, faced with spiritual famine of epic proportions. My heart aches with their need. Apostle-like I whine. What are we among so many? The consistent 2,000-year-old ever-new response is this. Blessed and broken, you are enough. I savor the blessed, cower at the broken, and pray to be enough. Thank you.